Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Our panelists are almost completely lined up, so let's convene tonight's summit. And today, from Brooklyn, joining us, Batya Unger-Sargon, opinion editor of Newsweek. Here in our Tel Aviv studios, Dr. Michael Adel, member of the scientific staff at the Israel Home Guardians. And soon we will be joined from Texas by Dr. H. Sterling Burnett, director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. And our main topic, the summer of the extremes, as Mark Twain once said. Everyone talks about the weather, but no one's really doing anything about it, right? So if we can go back, where do we go? Let's take a closer look and pick up the conversation from there.
Boiling temperatures, bone-dry landscapes, catastrophic wildfires. Extreme weather causing death and destruction across North America, Southern Europe, and North Africa this summer. At least 1,000 wildfires still ongoing for months in Canada, burning its way through almost 29 million acres of land so far, in the country's worst recorded fire season. Smoke-polluted air making its way south to even some southernmost U.S. states. Then, fires raging across the Mediterranean coastlines of Greece, Turkey, Algeria, and Tunisia, with tens of thousands evacuated from their homes and at least 40 declared dead. The Greek Prime Minister predicting climate change will manifest itself everywhere with great disasters. As Italy, Spain, and Greece also struggle with dangerously hot temperatures, experts say the next 5 years are likely to see global temperatures spike to record levels. There's a 98% likelihood that these years will become the warmest ever recorded. In addition to environmental repercussions, we face impending health, water management, and food security crises, with the United Nations and other organizations throwing billions of dollars into the fight against climate change and the debate of climate change reparations ramping up. Can we still reverse the effects of climate change?
Okay, let's get to it. Gentlemen, our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to let your initial stance, and then we pick up the conversation from there. Can we still reverse the effects of climate change? Batya Unger-Sargon, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
So for starters, I don't want to deny that climate change is happening, but some of that is what was in the video is not accurate. For example, NASA has told us that there's been a 24% decrease in wildfires since 1998, and there are also some benefits to global warming. There's a lot more food. Global production of food is way up because of the greening of the climate. 19 times more people die of cold than die of heat. So really, can we reverse the impact of climate change? That's a question for China, which is responsible for 27% of global emissions, and yet it's always demanded of the working class to pay the price.
Okay, and we'll definitely dive further into that in a split second. Dr. H. Sterling Burnett, your thoughts?
Well, I couldn't agree more with your last guest. The data shows no clear climate trend. In other words, hurricanes aren't getting worse, wildfires aren't getting worse, droughts, heat waves aren't worsening. The IPCC confirms this. So it's just not apparent to me that humans control the knob of climate, that we can reverse or that we're responsible for anything that's going on now as opposed to nature. Climate has changed before, it will change in the future, and it's not clear to me CO2 is the knob.
Okay, force of nature or human nature. Last but not least, Dr. Michael Adel, your take, sir.
So I'll pick up exactly where the previous speaker just left off. It's absolutely incontrovertible, and it's very clear that the primary source of climate change is the emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere by human activities. That's just unchallenged, in modern science today. And with regard to the question, can we reverse the effects? I think reverse is a very, very strong word. I think we can mitigate the effects. That's where we should be focusing. It's going to be a long time before we manage to reverse the effects.
So let's begin our conversation from this point exactly, and let's feel free to interact from this point onwards to engage in a conversation. So if this is the new normal, so to speak, should efforts and resources, not unlimited obviously, focus on adapting to the situation instead of preventing it or trying to change it? Batya?
Well, I have no problem with some sort of government legislation banning the use of private jets. Since it's always millionaires and billionaires who are screaming about climate change the loudest, you know, Mike Bloomberg, John Kerry, who himself flies around in a private jet, including when he goes to accept a climate award, right? I have no problem with the rich elites who want us to do something about this and who have picked this up as their, you know, cause du jour, making sacrifices. Sure, go ahead. What I have a problem with is demanding that the working class pay for it, because you have no middle class without affordable energy, and you have no democracy without a middle class. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this.
So I want to come from a place that's also associated with we as individuals, you know, whatever class we belong to, what we can do. And I think it's got to be coming from the people. I think that's the point that's made here. And we have to make individual choices. And the first choice one can make in order to mitigate the long-term impact of climate change is to change your consumption patterns. First and foremost, what you eat. What you eat has probably the most significant impact on your carbon footprint. Of course, the way you move yourself around a private jet is a very extreme example, but just the transition to public transportation versus private transportation, or the use of emission-free vehicles, these are all decisions that we as individuals can make. And really, we need to be looking at ourselves, right? We can also call out those, you know, great executives that are making their you know, pathetic efforts by taking their private jets, but we've got to really look at ourselves and make our own private decisions, individual decisions. In the end, it's going to be in our hands how we make this change.
Dr. Burnett, chime in, please. Yeah.
Well, I think that your question was spot on, which is adaptation. We know that the most powerful adaptive tool we have is wealth. The difference between what happens in New Orleans or Florida when a hurricane strikes and what happens in, say, Indonesia or India during a severe monsoon is not the wind speeds of the hurricanes or the length of time that they exist or the rainfall that they drop. It's the infrastructure that's built up because of wealth. It's the ability to predict and adapt to these types of extreme weather events. And we do better in that than wealthy countries, than in poorer countries. So the best adaptive mechanism is to help poorer countries become wealthy as quickly as possible, not to restrain them by restricting their fossil fuel use, not to say you can have hospitals that work on solar panel during the daytime, but at night, if you have an emergency medical thing, you're just out of luck, and we don't have refrigeration, by the way. That's adaptation. That's the key to adaptation.
So, as per usual, it's the economy, stupid, right? And Batya, circling back to the point you've made earlier, will the remedies for climate change essentially be worse than the disease, according to what you're saying? Will it essentially drive more people into poverty with higher costs?
Yeah, I mean, that's what they want, right? So I'll give you an example here. Let me give you an example of California, okay? California is the state in the United States with the highest level of income inequality, just overall gap between rich and poor. It is also not coincidentally the state with the highest regulation on electricity. There are people in California who have become energy poor. They're paying 40% of their income to get basic electricity in a place that's that hot, where you need an air conditioner, right? And who is enacting these policies? It's the millionaires living in Los Angeles, demanding that these people give up their cars and demanding that these people stop eating meat while they're flying around in private jets and lining the tops of their homes, you know, with solar panels because they can afford it. When you're actually increasing income inequality in the name of some problem that you're really exaggerating, because it does actually have benefits like, surprise, surprise, more food, right? Kind of a big benefit. I think it's time to take a good hard look in the mirror.
Yeah, I'd like to challenge that assertion that more food is the result of climate change, right? If I look in the country that I live in and I look at the effect of desertification, it's actually having a negative impact on the ability of the country to continue to produce food. And there are many areas in the world, specifically those areas where the poor live, that you're specifically trying to protect, where they are at most exposed to the reduction in their ability to produce food. You just have to look at what happens here in the Middle East. If you have a look at the situation in Syria, which led up to the civil war, it was basically a group of people that moved out of an area because they could no longer sustain their own growth of food that they'd been doing for decades, and the climate change adjusted, and they could no longer do that. So really, I mean, it made, you know, the assertion that the world's getting greener and we're going to produce more food, I think, is ludicrous.
He's just wrong. The data shows he's wrong. The study after study shows he's wrong. The Earth is greening, and CO2 is primarily responsible. In addition, it's interesting, Syria, the case he cites, there was not a drought in one region of Syria. There was a drought across the Middle East, and yet they all didn't have the same problem Syria did. In addition, if you want to help people feed themselves, you get them the tools necessary to have modern agricultural systems. And that includes fossil fuels. That includes modern tractors, modern fertilizers. When you take away fertilizers, as they did, I believe, in Sri Lanka, in 1 year, their crops were half, and they had riots, and they removed their government forcibly. Because they saw the results of going organic.
That's completely off topic. That's completely off topic. And nobody's suggesting that we need to go organic. All we're suggesting is that the impact of climate change is to reduce the world's ability to produce food. Fossil fuels are the largest single thing that has brought progress in the 20th century. And yeah, but fossil fuels is only one element in climate change. In fact, fossil fuels today is probably not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is actually the emissions that are coming out of the food manufacturing industry. If you just look at the emissions directly from the growth of meat, specifically red meat, right? One of the biggest sources of methane being emptied into the atmosphere is actually the posterior of cows, which are produced in order so we can eat meat. If people, instead of eating meat, would choose to eat plant-based proteins, then we could drastically reduce the emissions of methane, which is 20 times or even 80 times more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so, you know, the idea of now we can allow ourselves to continue to consume meat or to burn fossil fuels, and the world's going to green. You know, that's living in Gaga land. You would more than double the amount of land needed for agriculture. So no, I completely say the reverse. You agree or disagree. That's what the data shows. Most of the land that today is cleared in South America is cleared in order to grow grain, in order to produce meat. You would clear wild land, you would clear grasslands to grow crops.
Okay, we do need to take a break shortly. So, Batya Unger, Sargon, if you can wrap it up for us before we do.
I just think that this is all immaterial when you have a country like China just building a new coal plant every single year because they know that that's how they're sustaining their people. For us to sit around and squabble about whether I can have a hamburger is totally immaterial. But again, they always come to the working class and demand that they pay for it for these pieties.
So perhaps the premise of the climate crisis is not about classes, but politics perhaps turned it into such. We are taking a very short break, but when we get back, we continue with this fascinating take on the current and future state of affairs when it comes to the weather of the climate, if you will. Dear panelists, you're staying with us. Short break, and we'll be back.
Esta semana en News24, Honduras e Israel conmemoran 76 años de la gesta del barco de refugiados Exodus que arribó a Haifa bajo bandera hondureña. Dave, un bot de inteligencia artificial, una aplicación para responder preguntas de manera inmediata a pacientes con cáncer. Orlando Cat nos trae para disfrutar los ritmos y la música de Latinoamérica. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de i24 News.
It's a living, breathing organism that pulsates through millennia. Touch it, listen to it, smell it, taste it. Experience the Holy Land like never before. Holy Land Uncovered, every Sunday, only on i24 News.
If you could travel to the Middle East right now without packing and without a plane ticket, would you? We are in Tel Aviv, Israel. Welcome to i24 News Digital.
Here, we bring Israel and the entire Middle East right to your social networks.
On your phone, on your desktop. Here, i24 News creates videos especially made for social media. And believe me, we are out there working hard.
Right here.
Israel and Nepal.
For the very first time.
Is how they begin. Making original content. Streaming live, even in the hard moments.
There are literally rockets going off. I'm in a bomb shelter.
And filming docuseries. With us, you will find all the big stories you missed on television. So join i24 News on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And discover the Middle East with us.
O receio agora é que chegue às casas, não é? Que isto é tudo mata à volta. O receio é que chegue às casas. Tentámos ajudar como pudemos com baldes, mas não, pronto, não vale muito também.
On the inside of political and religious passions in Jerusalem, breaking down the financial trends shaping the global economy, giving you key context, not just headlines, with the stories from Israel that touch the U.S. and those across the region with impact far beyond its borders. Catch the rundown where the Middle East meets the world.
Sometimes it's tough to get past all the noise and get to the heart of the story. Even tougher to make sense of it all. And that's where we come in. I'm David Matlin, and each weekday I'll take on the most important topics, breaking down the issues so you can decide for yourself. Zoom in each weekday here at i24 News.
Strictly Security, your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts, analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Saturdays, only on i24 News.
Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Dr. Michael E. Adel, Batya Unger Sargon, and Dr. H. Sterling Burnett. Thank you all so very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, of course, but before we get back to our conversation, carrying the burden, excuse my pun, White House climate envoy John Kerry saying loud and clear, the battle might be joined until it comes to the pocket. Let's take a listen.
Are you planning to commit America to climate reparations? That is to say, we have to pay some other country because they had a flood or they had a hurricane or a typhoon or a wildfire?
Under no circumstances.
Very good.
All right, let's get to it. Should wealthier countries pay compensation to poorer countries ravaged by climate change? Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each, and we take it from there. Dr. Adel, please take the lead.
So that was essentially the decision taken at COP27 at the end of last year. And in my eyes, it's a bit of a cop-out. I mean, that was pretty obvious that decision should have been taken years ago. It took years to debate it through. But what it did do in the conference is it diverted attention away from the more critical question, is whether or not the main polluting countries are going to diminish their greenhouse gas emissions. But the short answer is absolutely, and I think there are mechanisms being put in place now.
Dr. Burnett, your thoughts?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of compensation, because I don't think we can say that climate change, as opposed to natural weather events, have harmed these people just like they harm everyone else. What I think we should do is allow them to develop, allow them access to the technologies that we've had that have made us wealthier, so they can make themselves wealthy, so they can harden their infrastructure, so they can have emergency procedures and emergency personnel and technologies that work here in the United States, in Europe, that make it the case that no matter what type of weather event, no matter what type of climate change occurs, they're better able to adapt, and they're wealthier.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just conclude this quick fire round and get back to that. Batya Ungur-Sargon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of a shakedown really gets on my nerves. For starters, we haven't even paid reparations to the descendants of American slaves, so that's definitely top of my list when it comes to reparations. I will say that all South American and Central American countries have seen just skyrocketing crop yields in recent years. What has been disappearing are good middle-class jobs in America, which have been outsourced to other countries that have, you know, all of these alleged climate events, and also just a deluge of immigrants who have taken American jobs. So I'm not quite sure which direction the reparations should go in.
Yeah, Dr. Burnett, please. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I don't think reparations are suitable. I think that we owe it through the world, through our contribution from the U.S. to the World Bank. If we're going to help people, let's help them, and we know what helps people. Help them get on their feet. Now, that's not with a constant aid, but it's getting out of their way. We shouldn't allow the World Bank to say, no, we're not going to allow you. We're not going to make loans for coal-fired power plants, but we will make loans for solar installations. And we shouldn't, by the way, go through the corrupt governments in developing countries to make those investments. We should go directly to the people through microfinancing, for things like that. So villages can help themselves create water infrastructure, so they don't spend 5 hours a day gathering water and keeping women and children impoverished.
So I tend to agree with some of those points, actually. I think that there are places where we need to focus those resources, right, that we are putting into these countries. And I think, you know, the examples of diminishing water scarcity is critical. But I think what we don't want to do is we don't want to force them to follow the same path as we have, right? They now have an opportunity to actually follow a different path. Let's say, should we now be forcing all companies to introduce, you know, landline telephones? Absolutely not, right? They live in a different world. You know, we can move, they can leapfrog over the idea of having landlines and go straight to cell phones. You know, do they all need the same bank accounts that we once had? No, they can all use it on their cell phone. The same thing here. We don't need to necessarily drive coal-burning power stations down their throat just because that's the way we did it. If they have alternative methods and there are other more effective ways to produce energy, especially in the equatorial areas, then we need to look at a different model. And this is the way we should be providing assistance. Now, I also agree with your point about how to actually get the money to the people who really need it and will do the right actions, right? Pushing it through the governments of these countries is probably not the right trajectory. But there are many alternatives through various non-governmental entities that are doing astounding work in some of these countries.
Batya, please chime in. A very interesting take there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm agreeing with both of you guys that a lot of these payments end up being, you know, taking money from poor people in rich countries and giving them to rich people in poor countries, right? We know that the pipeline for all of this aid is severely compromised. You know, again, I feel for people in these situations, but the evidence that things are getting significantly worse and that the blame for that lies with developed countries or rich countries, I just really don't think that has been substantiated. And I think that there's a little bit of a chutzpah at play coming to the American working class that has been struggling as a result of a more globalized point of view that demands that they take responsibility for what's going on in other countries when the elites in our country sell them out in order to build up the middle class in other countries. So I sort of see things much more from that point of view. We have our own responsibilities to people who are struggling in this country, and I think it's a big chutzpah to demand that we take money from our working class and give it to the rich elites in other countries.
Yeah, so I'm not sure who we're taking the money from, right?
Like
your assertion that money's coming from the lower classes. It's a government fund, right? And the government has to make a decision about it.
Exactly.
The government doesn't have
money.
money.
Every money that the government spends comes from us. Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't create. The government doesn't create wealth.
Sometimes it does.
No, actually, there's a lot of opportunity to create wealth here, right? A lot of opportunity.
Well, there is.
One of the things that can be done with this kind of money is actually to create wealth. It can create wealth in the other countries. It can be used as investment, right? There are so many interesting new mechanisms being developed now, and the assumption that it's taking food off the table, then you've got to fix your tax system in America if that's the problem, right?
Well,
maybe you're allocating the tax burden incorrectly.
I don't think either of us would disagree with that.
There. Yeah, that's right. But the idea that someone in Washington, D.C., say a John Kerry or a Joe Biden, knows best for Africans what path they should take. No one I'm aware of said we should force.
No, but there is an issue here.
What we said is allow them if that's what they choose. When they went to China, when the World Bank refused to loan them money for coal power plants, what happened? Did they not get them? No, they did. They just went to China. So China's Silk and Road Initiative built allies in Africa, whereas we turned them off.
But there is a question of A, moral obligation that can be debated, obviously, and B, whether this is a joint battle or each for their own, Dr. Adel.
Oh, look, it's very easy to turn your back, right? But I feel it's an individual responsibility, right? I mean, the discussion of whether or not the government should be funding, I'll come back to my original point, right? Yeah. The most critical path that we need to go down is for each individual to, first of all, recognize the fact that their modern lifestyle is impacting through climate change the rest of the developing world. Right, recognizing that fact, and then looking at your own lifestyle and making your own lifestyle decisions that you have to follow through with, that in the long term will at least allow the future generations to have something to live for. And really, that's where I believe it belongs. It's an individual ethical decision that you make. It's not just by leaving it to the government to cover our proverbial rear ends.
To compromise the present for the sake of the future to an extent. Dr. Burnett, we're nearing the end of our discussion. Your concluding remarks, sir.
Well, I think that actively with climate policies, we're compromising the future and well-being of people existing today for people who will be much wealthier in the future. I'm not convinced climate change is a crisis or causing a crisis. Oh. It happens, but there's no data that shows whether events have gotten worse or more severe. So what we need is people to become wealthier, regardless of the weather. I've just got to laugh
at that.
Okay. I think that we will wrap it up at this point. Batya Ungar-Sargon, Dr. A. Sterling Burnett, and Dr. Michael E. Adel. Thank you all so very much for this 2 minutes, and we're back.